Thank you very much for joining us right here back on the Business Prime Time. I'm joined by a very, very special guest. Former Governor D. Subbarao joins us with his take and his perspective on what has really been ground-changing events as far as India's monetary and fiscal policy regime is concerned. Thank you very much, Dr. Subbarao, India's former central banker, joining us here. I do want to ask you, 24 hours after Governor Patel decided to put in his papers and resign, we had a conversation with your successor, Raghuram Rajan, and he said this is the ultimate weapon of protest that a civil servant or a regulator has. Do you believe Governor Urjit Patel has resigned on the grounds of protest, because his letter says these are personal reasons?
No, I do believe that he resigned because of his differences with the government and because he's been pushed beyond his level of comfort. Of course, he mentioned personal reasons in his statement, but that was, I believe, owing to a sense of responsibility. It's very clear that the developments over the last 2 months have caused a lot of discomfort to Governor Patel, which caused his resignation.
No, absolutely. This did cause a resignation. But Dr. Subbarao, if I may go in a little deeper into what was really happening, there was a very bitter war of words being played out between North Block and Mint Street. We know intellectual differences have been there in the past. You and Mr. Chidambaram had intellectual differences, which prompted him to say that if the government has to walk the path of growth alone, so be it. And then, of course, he wrote a chapter for your book and things like that. So there comes a time in the relationship between fiscal and monetary authority when there is room for intellectual differences, and these creative differences perhaps are good. What is the Lakshman Rekha for that creative tension to move into a point of no return?
See, there's some friction or considerable amount of friction between the government and the central bank is hardwired into this relationship. Just as you mentioned, one is the monetary authority, the other is the fiscal authority. In our case, the RBI is also the regulator of banks. Therefore, it's very important that the RBI have autonomy, and they seem to have autonomy. And that the government has legitimate concerns. It has the responsibility of letting its concerns be known to the RBI, but it's got to pursue its position, its views on its concerns, but not beyond a certain point. As you said earlier also, there were differences between the central bank and the government before me, after me, and during my tenure. But what was different this time was that these issues are played out in the public domain for over 2 months. The discourse was quite sharp. And also there was speculation that the government is trying to institutionalize its influence in the policy management of RBI through some restructuring of the board. So all those are factors which make a difference between earlier discourse and the current one.
No, absolutely. But Dr. Subbarao, I will pick on the last point that you made, which is restructuring of the board. And the thinking within the government is that RBI as an institution needs to be a more board-controlled, a more board-run institution. That is unprecedented. Nowhere in the world is central bank a board-controlled, a board-governed institution. But having said that, what happens to the structure of the board right now? You've got representatives from industry, and I'm not saying any of them are bad, but there is a conflict of interest. Mr. Chidambaram was on our show yesterday, and he said there is an obvious conflict of interest if you're going to make the board run RBI. It's the domain of specialists. You should let them do it. Do you believe the first move in that direction? So, A, do you believe that was the big trigger, which obviously will hurt the autonomy and independence of the RBI if it were to start reporting to a board and the board starts making decisions? And the second and the more important question, sir, also is that will this entail changes in the structure of the board? You've got to throw out corporates then. You've got to throw out people who may have a conflict of interest going forward and perhaps even do right now.
Oh, absolutely, Supriya. Your question contains the answer also. First, on the first question about whether the proposed reconstitution of the board was the big trigger for Governor Patel's resignation, I cannot speculate on that. There were a number of issues that were floating around in the public domain, including the possibility or this big issue about board restructuring being on the agenda for the board meeting later this week. So I believe that the Governor Patel's resignation is owing to the circumstances and the issues that are played out in the last 2 months and what he anticipates might have come in the December 14 board meeting. So I would not isolate any single factor as having been responsible for his resignation. On the second, much larger issue about RBI becoming a board-managed institution, I agree with you completely that the board as constituted presently is not an appropriate forum for policy-making decisions. As you said, the board comprises people of eminence, people who have known, respected, who've been achievers in their respective fields. And RBI takes advice from the board, the management takes their advice and counsel. But this board, as currently structured, cannot take decisions on policies simply because of the conflict of interest issue that you maintained. There are corporate people, there are business leaders, there are financial markets people. All of them cannot take decisions on policy issues. So if the government wants the board, RBI, to be a board-driven institution, on which too I have some reservations, but if indeed the government wants that, they have to restructure the board altogether, have professionals there, in fact, they should be full-time on RBI board so that they have no other conflict of interest. That's the way it should be restructured, if at all the government wants to push this to its logical conclusion.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, a message has been delivered. I wonder how that message will be read. But Dr. Subbarao, the reason why I asked you my question on boards was because the issues on which the RBI and the government cannot see eye to eye or were not agreeing upon are all out in the public domain. The government wanted excess liquidity for NBFCs. The RBI, perhaps rightly so, because they manage liquidity, said the system-wide liquidity has to be looked at. There should not be an additional lifeline for NBFCs. The government wanted PCA dilution. The RBI had its reservations for perhaps just the right reasons. You can't lend yourself out of troubles that India's banks are in, and there is a reason why they are there under, PCA. And the third and the more important issue was sharing reserves. My question, sir, is what happens to these issues of contention? What happens to issues where the RBI was resisting the government on some of these specific issues? And the reason why I ask that question is because my own presumption is that this is not personality driven. I don't think Governor Patel himself alone was resistant to this. I'm presuming RBI as an institution had its reservations on them.
Oh, absolutely. The governor is the face of the RBI, but the governor reflects the institutional position and wisdom and experience of the RBI, no matter who the governor is. So you're absolutely right that it is not Governor Patel's personal reservations, but it is the institution's reservations. So I believe that these issues have to be pursued. The government will pursue them. What I believe is that the government is right to raise these issues. The government is right to let its position be known, let its concerns be known to the RBI. The government is right to pursue them. But it should not have pushed RBI beyond the point, because the RBI should enjoy autonomy on these issues and should be seen to be enjoying autonomy on these issues. And particularly now, especially on the surplus transfer issue, I think whoever is appointed as the governor, the RBI must give him or her at least 6 months' time to settle down, to get some understanding of the deeper issues before government pursues the issue of surplus transfer.
No, absolutely. And, I think a lot of the sense, you're making so much sense and you're being candid, and I appreciate that, sir. But you spoke about the next governor. And just before I move any further, there is a lot of speculation on whether the next governor is going to be a bureaucrat that the government may favor because the experiment with the economist hasn't taken off. You are somebody who's a career bureaucrat, but an economist by training. And so it's only fair to ask you, does it really make a difference who heads the RBI? And right now, are the scales tipped in favor of a bureaucrat because of the familiarity a bureaucrat has with how the Indian system is run and governed?
Well, it certainly makes a difference who the governor of RBI is, and I'm sure and I hope that the government will pick a person who is known for his professional competence and sense of responsibility and maturity. I'm sure they will do that. There need be no doubt about what are the required qualifications of the next governor. On the other issue of what category the next governor should be drawn from, I don't think there need be any presumption that at this juncture a civil servant is suited to be the next governor. Of course, as you said, a civil servant has the positive attributes that he'll be a known quantity. He would also, or he or she would actually know the government and the people there. But on the negative side, a civil servant coming in will not start with enjoy the credibility of the markets, because the markets will see him or her as a person sent by the government to behave in a way different from the earlier governors. So a civil servant will have both positives and negatives coming in. I don't want to rule out the possibility of a civil servant, but I want to say that there be no presumption that a civil servant is absolutely the ideal choice at this current juncture.
I'm so glad you're clarifying that, because it was almost a given that a civil servant would come in. But you're right about the credibility of the institution that should be preserved and maintained. Dr. Subbarao, one of the points that I want to pick up specifically with you is, and I think the government's philosophy and how they plan to salvage the situation is really going to be determined by who the next RBI governor is going to be appointed. And markets will perhaps somewhat be unsettled till then, because the medium-term reaction will depend on the new governor's philosophy on inflation. If he's a hawk, FPI flow will moderate and markets will take that position. Then do you expect markets to continue to be a little tentative up until the time a new governor is appointed? Is this really going to have an impact as far as our inflows is concerned? Because there are a lot of people who believe that these are things that impact FPI flows. These are things that imply inflation projections. These are things that imply what markets make of fiscal positions and all of that.
Oh, certainly. I will not use the exact language that you have used, but there would certainly be some uncertainty, some anxiety, some bewilderment in the markets, both domestic and foreign investors, etc., who are looking to take positions in India, and they will look to see who the government will appoint as the next governor, whether he would command credibility. And I believe the markets will also see how the government will change its stance vis-a-vis the RBI, learning from the experience of the last 2 months and this episode of resignation of Dr. Patel. So I'm sure the markets will be looking forward to several signals in the next couple of months. The appointment of the governor, who the person is one variable, but there are also a number of other variables which will play out.
Dr. Subbarao, before I let you go, a final question to you. And the board of the RBI is obviously a divided house. Many people believe, in fact, it's overtly politicized, and which is why people are keeping a very close eye on who the next governor is and how much of a clout is he really going to have in terms of policy decision. But the only way to dissipate this tension, the only way to diffuse, the high-tempered battle between the RBI and the government really is somebody has to back off. In this case, Governor Patel has sent a very strong message by resigning with immediate effect. What is it that the government now needs to know? Because my own sense is that the ball to restore the institution's credibility is now in the government's court. And one worries if they are going to use this as an opportunity to salvage the situation, or one fears could this opportunity be used to actually push the agenda that Governor Patel was not ready to push.
I cannot speculate on that, but I can say that restoring the credibility of the Reserve Bank of India is very, very important at this point of time. The markets should see the Reserve Bank as autonomous, as acting independently in the best public interest. The responsibility of doing that will depend both on the next governor as well as on the government. The next governor, as we spoke earlier on in this conversation, will have to restore the credibility, act in a way that inspires the confidence of the markets. But the government on its part will have to do some deep introspection and decide whether they're going to pursue the agenda as they've done in the past 2 months, or whether they're going to modify their stance. There is absolutely nothing wrong in the government raising issues of public concern. There is nothing wrong at all about the government putting forward its position to the RBI. But there are ways of doing it. There are limits to which the government must push this. So a lot will depend also on how the government will modify its stance, if at all, taking lessons from this experience.
Dr. Subbarao, final question, and I promise this will be the final question. Just to be the devil's advocate for a minute, there are many in North Block and on Min Street who point out that it was the communication breakdown, the fact that Governor Patel and the Finance Minister were not even meeting over the customary meeting before policy, or the fact that RBI did not send a representative, in the Feb 12 circular, the fact that RBI said no to 10 out of 10 things that the government wanted. You were a man who kept communication going with a seemingly very tough finance minister. What is the key to keep the channel of communication on? And did Governor Patel perhaps falter on that account?
I cannot really say key, Supriya. The governor has to maintain communication with the government. There could be differences, but those differences will have to be resolved. And the responsibility of keeping the communication going will depend on both sides. It takes two hands to clap. While the governor should not back off or just, withdraw from communication, but the government should also ensure that the atmosphere for communication is cordial and is friendly and is constructive. So that's all I would say.
All right. On that note, Dr. Subbarao, thank you very, very much for joining us right here on ET Now. We continue to get you voices that matter, and credible voices like Dr. Subbarao or his successor Raghuram Rajan or former finance minister, and even people from the government. I think the entire effort is to dissipate the tension, to diffuse the high voltage drama, and to bring credibility back to the institution. I've been saying this, I may sound like a broken record. RBI isn't just another institution. It isn't just another investigative agency in the country. It is India's premier institution with impeccable credibility. RBI has global repute. People of global repute have headed that institution. Let's bring credibility back to the institution as far as RBI is concerned. We get you the voices that matter and the opinions that count. Professor Dr. D. Subbarao, former RBI governor, in conversation with us right here. But the message is quite simple from experts. This is a big, big message of protest delivered by Urjit Patel. It will serve the government, the economy, and the monetary and fiscal policy regime well if they pay heed to the message of protest that Governor Patel has sent out. Backing off a little bit from issues that are big bones of contention will also be a good idea. Thank you very much for being with us. We take a quick breather. Back with plenty more right here on ET Now.